So disruption is about that in an industry, the dynamics and the competitive power between different actors and players is completely changing, and that ultimately some of the parties will disappear. So it's massively different than a whole transition of an industry where you see that all players are making a kind of shift in radically improving their products and their services. So changing of role and competitive power between different actors, which is restructuring the whole industry.
Well, I think the biggest trends in disruption that I see is something that's well discussed, which is the prevalence of information, the ability to analyse that information, the ability to bring and analyse information together from vastly different types of sources.
So ultimately that means that manufacturers in the industry will either be heavily commoditized and being pushed down into the food chain, or that they will suffer that much that they just disappear from the market. Or if we look at the positive side, is that they will find a new business model, a new value proposition, a new position into the whole value chain, and that they actually thrive in the future. So if they're not embracing the changes, somebody else will. And that is what we're seeing, that we see a lot of more companies coming which have the data and algorithms completely in their DNA, and they are entering these industries and the sectors. So they will play this game, they will start providing information and intelligence to clients, and if manufacturers are not joining in and embracing that change, that is ultimately the moment that system integrators or data-driven companies will take that role and push manufacturers down into the food chain, and that they are being completely commoditized. So that means they only provide the metal, they provide the equipment, and that's it. The services is done by somebody else, so services in terms of maintaining the equipment, but also service in terms of how to turn that equipment into value for the clients. That will then be done by somebody else, and that means ultimately you're constantly under pressure in lower revenue, lower margins, and hard to differentiate yourselves.
I completely agree with you, actually. I think the real danger for businesses is that they get trapped in a race to the bottom of this commoditisation, where they previously thought they had value-added products that end up as being increasingly commoditised, increasing price pressure. And that's a limiting game for companies if they get stuck in that.
Let's be honest, a lot of manufacturers are customer focused. They do try to understand customer needs. They are working on innovation and change. But I think that the trap they're stuck in business as usual. They're stuck in kind of their current business logic about how their business works, how their clients work, how the whole industry works. So everything revolves around improving that. And that means that they're not shifting to let's say, the future where the disruption is coming from. So they have to start embracing that everything they need to change for the future means it's completely different than they're doing now. So they work for different clients, solving different problems, working with different partners, with other capabilities and competencies. Everything will change. So that is actually the pre-assumption. Everything will change, so let's focus on that.
Well, I think there's two things. If you're stuck in the race to the bottom, that's tough and it takes all your effort. So raising your sights to the horizon is difficult in that circumstance. And secondly, a lot of manufacturers, they've focused on the product, they're focused on producing it and getting it out the door. And that's a very different type of culture from the sort of culture you need to be able to deliver effective services, for example. So you've got a cultural predisposition on the one hand, and you've got business as usual, particularly if you're trapped in a race to the bottom already, putting competitive pressure that makes it hard. One approach that we've found really powerful is to start to completely rethink the environment you're sitting in, the nature of the relationships you have, the players out there that you could have relationships with, the relationship with your clients. Where is value created? Are there people out there who can help you create new value and really transform that network of relationships to liberate value in new ways?
And the other thing we have to better understand is as soon as we start moving away from transactional business, but more partnering with clients, which means it's about integrating, having our operations integrate, because that's where ultimately the value comes from. That the interdependency becomes much higher. The relationship you have with your clients is going to be completely different. And by the way, you're not the only one. It's other actors who are integrating in a similar way with your same client as well. So that whole network thinking of creating value, that's another major shift in thinking.
The first thing I think is to have a rational way of actually weighing up the options, identifying new options and assessing them. And there are techniques which we can share in the workshop, for example, about how to do that, how to think radically about the nature of relationships, where value is created, and how you can perhaps change that network that you're dealing with and exploit new partnerships that could do something different. The horizon of these kind of changes is probably, depending on the industry, it's in the 3 to 5 years. And once you've identified opportunities, it needs a concerted effort and decent planning and decent resourcing to actually deliver the results, I would say. It's not something that comes in the 5 minutes. So coherence and persistence, once you've identified opportunities, is probably the key.
So we have to understand those forces which, whenever you try to think on the longer term and out of the box, you will feel pressure back to current business logic. So we have to understand those forces, we have to recognize them, and we have to have some good strategies how to fight them. So, for example, the more radical and longer term your idea or your opportunity is to innovate your proposition or your position in the network, the longer it will take before that will turn into results. So what you typically will see is in any kind of resource allocation decision, these initiatives tend to kind of fall off the table. So how we're going to prevent that? That is something we have to be very explicit in, be aware of, have the right strategies in place to prevent that, because only then we will be able to look further down the road, further into the future, and make sure that we make those steps into that direction instead of going back again to only improving our current business model.
Yeah, I'd add to that. It's a well-known dictum about hearts and minds, and you need to really invest in creating that vision of the future, not just amongst your own people, but amongst the other people, the partners that you might want to have. And just keep that vision in mind, because without it, the day-to-day pressures continually, push you backwards. But actually creating that common view and that common vision requires time and effort, and refreshing it and constantly keeping it there and keeping it in people's minds is a challenge. Well, I go, 1, where's disruption coming from? What are its sources? Do we understand it? Can we express that for our industry? 2, what are the options that we have in order to really respond to them? How can we get to be the disruptor rather than to be the person who's being disrupted? And 3, how do we actually set off on the journey then of doing it and maintaining the tension and maintaining the drive, but in an adaptable way, given that the future's unpredictable? Senior leaders from the manufacturing industry across a range of sectors should seriously consider joining this workshop.
Like, for example, CEO, Vice President of Strategy, Vice President of Digital Transformation, or the Vice President of Service.
I think people who are looking for new growth opportunities, looking for opportunities to transform the market in which they operate, perhaps concerned about new market entrants who might be taking away their ability to deliver service for their products and exploiting data that they otherwise might use themselves.
And of course are looking for other strategies and approach for their team to step out of business as usual. So as participant of the strategic workshop, you will get a better understanding of best practices, pitfalls, and the right strategies to avoid them. You will get an insight into how to drive momentum and how to navigate disruption. You will develop an action plan for the next 3 months, and of course you will expand your network of like-minded peers. So come and join us in Cambridge, 29th of January. Really looking forward to see you there.